because those doors are not going to stay wide open, but enough of us can push them open. Or like Ava DuVernay said once when I invited her to Spelman, we can build our own doors.
Hey everyone, welcome back to The Blerd Girl Live. I'm Karen Mahorn, aka The Blerd Girl, and I hope your week is off to an amazing start. Tonight, I'm totally excited to have award-winning writers and producers Tananarive Due and Steven Barnes on the show to talk about their work and their love of horror and fantasy genres. Tananarive Due is an award-winning author who teaches Black Horror and Afrofuturism at UCLA. She is an executive producer on Shudder's groundbreaking documentary, Horror Noire, A History of Black Horror. And this is an amazing documentary. If you haven't watched this, you need to go get Shudder. They give you 1 month free. Do it. Watch this. She's also written some amazing sci-fi and horror books, including My Soul to Keep, Living Blood, Ghost Summer. There's tons of them. Steven Barnes, her husband, is also an award-winning writer in his own right. He's been writing prose and for TV for almost 40 years, including Stargate SG-1, Andromeda, Ben 10 Alien Force. He's also written several sci-fi and horror novels himself, including the award-winning Lion's Blood, which got the seal of approval from the late, great Octavia Butler herself. Now, together, Tananarive and Steven wrote an amazing episode of The Twilight Zone in season 2 on CBS All Access called A Small Town. It was starring Damon Wayans Jr. And we're going to get into all that tonight. So welcome to the show, Tananarive Due and Steven Barnes.
Greetings.
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, Yay! I'm
so excited.
Yay! So I got to start off by asking, I know you've collaborated on several things, but you also collaborated on a horror thriller book called Devil's Wake, correct?
Yes.
Yes, we did.
Doesn't that book start with a pandemic and then the whole world turns upside down?
Yeah. People take a diet pill at the same time they take a flu shot. And if you do that, bad things happen.
Yeah, we decided to try to explain where zombies came from, although we never called them zombies. And it's so funny. We didn't think of it so much as a pandemic book because we just wanted to tell a zombie story. But in recent meetings with our manager, he was like, well, we have to be careful with pandemic stories right now. It's like, oh, right. That is a pandemic story, isn't it?
So I got to ask, what have the two of you been doing during the lockdown, the pandemic? You're in California, right?
Yes.
The worst thing about the pandemic is that the days tend to be very similar one to another, and that creates a sensation of time passing more rapidly. The sensation that as you get older, it seems like time passes more rapidly. It's because there's this thing called the storage key phenomena psychologically, where your brain will make symbols of things that you do to kind of save space. It's like a compression routine. And if you're doing the same thing every day, you look back and a whole week just evaporates, or a month just evaporates. So there has been a lot of trying to do things that are a little different every day, so that my brain has something new, so that it stores a day as being an actual event rather than just a blip. What about you, T? How are you?
There's a line. We just rewatched Contagion because in the beginning we thought it was cute to watch pandemic movies, and then I remembered I'm a hypochondriac, and I was having these panic attacks at night, so I had to stop watching pandemic movies. But there's this great line in Contagion where the girl says, "I wish there was a shot to stop the passage of time." It's like, oh, that is so real and so dead on. My issue in the very beginning was just being terrified that I was going to, even last night, I had a little phlegm in my throat. And I was like, how did I get COVID? This is a thought going through my mind as I'm trying to go to sleep. So I do have to fight off panic and hypochondria, that any little tickle, any little sniffle, a headache, because the symptoms are just so vast that means in 6 weeks I'm going to be on a ventilator about to die alone. So I have to wrestle with that. And I've had to do more affirmations, gratitude, just trying to deal with my fears. But it's very motivating with my writing. I have to say that it does keep me writing because it's like, I got to get this done before I die.
Oh my God. Let's see. Okay, for the people who are not aware in the chat, Tananarive and Steven are married. Even though it doesn't look like they're in the same space, they're in the same space. So this is
We're married?
hilarious.
Wait a minute.
And I'm
Why
also
am I
shocked.
sleeping on the couch? Hold on a minute.
I'm also
We
shocked
got
to hear
talking to do.
that that the two of you, that Tananarive, you have these panic attacks and all these things make your mind spiral out of control and you panic because you write such good horror, and the two of you have done some great psychological horror. Is this like is the source material coming from your dreams or something?
I think I write horror because I have this fearful streak. You know, from the time I was a kid, I had a very strong sense of my own mortality, just lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, that, oh my gosh, one day I'm going to be old, and, you know, and all those sorts of things that kids generally don't think about. That was always in my mind. And in fact, I alluded to that in my first novel, The Between, with the John Keats poem that begins, "When I have fears that I will cease to be before my pen has gleaned my teeming brain," or whatever. So I think it's because I'm a scaredy cat that I write horror. I'm really trying to create characters who, frankly, are a lot braver than I am, who think better on their feet, who are more resourceful than I am, as role models over and over and over again, because it's not going to be zombies, but I guess I felt it's always going to be something. And we're learning in 2020, the horror, it can be real.
Absolutely. And actually, some of the reality of some of what we've been seeing has been obviously police brutality, which is not new. It's very interesting because I actually saw a speech that you gave, like, I think it was 2014 or 2015, Tananarive, and you were talking about worrying about, you know, our kids going in the street and things like that because of what might happen to them at the hands of the police. What is it like trying to be creative in this time, and how do you marry your creative side with your activism?
I thank you for that question. My late mother, Patricia Stevens Due, and my father, who's 85 now, John Due, were both civil rights activists in the 1960s and continued to be lifelong activists. So I had very strong role models in terms of trying to have real impact in the world. And I'm just grateful every day that they didn't think I was wasting my time as a writer. Because I often say, if they had told me I was wasting my time, I would not be a writer, or it would have taken me a long time to come to the point of accepting that I was a writer. So I was very lucky to have that support, and also very explicitly told that representation matters by my parents. So I do marry those aspects as much as possible. In fact, I just finished a 7-year novel writing project called The Reformatory, which frankly I wanted to stop writing many, many times. It's set in 1950, which is not a fun year to be hanging out in. It's about children, so it was really tough for me to have mean things happening to children. But it's basically about the Dozier School in Marianna, Florida. It's the same school that Colson Whitehead wrote about in The Nickel Boys, but mine has ghosts, is how I'll pitch it. But really the point was to just create a liberation story. So whenever I felt myself flagging, the research was bringing me down, the story was bringing me down, I'd see a picture of Tamir Rice, the 12-year-old boy who was shot to death by police in Cleveland with no warning because he was playing with a toy gun, or Sandra Bland. You know, it's just because it's not about 1950, I kept telling myself. It's about now. These issues, this book will help people understand the lineage of the kinds of policing and justice system issues that we're still trying to figure out how to grapple with now.
How about you, Steven? Is it hard being creative right now with everything going on?
You know, I don't have any intense moments, no burnouts where things just aren't working. But there is more of a sense that I've been thrown into a little bit of a lower gear, that I'm pulling, you know, that there's more stress. I'm a very regimented person. I have a lot of routine in my life. I wake up, I meditate, I go through very specific things. I interact on social media, I work out, and then there is a minimum amount of work I have to get done every day. And that's you have to do at least one sentence every day. So if you do that, then what you find is that you have set you've set the tone to do a lot more than just a single sentence. So yes, the stress is there, but stress doesn't hurt you. It's the strain that hurts you. The difference between stress and strain is stress is the pressure that you're under. If I was to take this piece of paper and push it, the stress from an engineering point of view is the pressure per unit area, right? But strain is deformation per unit length. It's the strain that hurts you. So I have a lot of different things that I do over the course of the day to prevent stress from becoming strain. There's meditation and visualization and affirmations and just getting up and moving, exercise, and making sure to interact with my family, talk to people that I love, remember my purpose in life. Why am I doing these things? And the more your actions over the course of a day are not about you, but you're seeing how you're benefiting your family, your community, you're trying to communicate with the world, you're trying to be right in the eyes of the divine. The more you have things that are larger than you that motivate you, the easier it is to wake up in the morning and realize, oh, these are the things I have to do. This is what I have to take care of. There are people to teach, there are people to help, there are stories to tell, there are things to be done. And when you've got that, then you actually can turn the stress into energy. You turn that fear into energy, which is what it's supposed to be. Your fear exists, in your system to warn you that it's time to run or time to fight. It turns into depression when it feels like there's, no one to fight and nowhere to run. So it's critical that every day you can see, at least one step you can take that will move you in the direction that you need to go. And if you have that, then you get that done. And then once you've taken one step, sometimes it's easier to take another and then another and then another.
Okay, I'm gonna need him to take a class. No, I was listening. I was like, okay, I have to get up every morning and take it, and then I have to meditate, and then I'm like,
well let me tell you. In all honesty, the single most important piece of advice I can give you if stress is an issue is every 3 hours, set your timer on your phone to go off every 3 hours, like 9 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and spend 60 seconds, 1 minute doing deep, slow, diaphragmatic belly breathing. If you will do that single thing, you will break the hold that stress has over you. I kid you not.
Wow. Okay. No, I am really going to do that one.
See, Steven's a lot more granola than I am. So, in the sense that he's from California, I mean that in a very loving way, darling.
Right, because he's in one room breathing, and you're in the other room trying to write your life away before you.
Well, he has taught me so much, and if there's anything I learned from my parents' civil rights generation, it's how much stress and strain, especially, did eat them up and burn them out. And I see the same thing with activists today. So that generation didn't know about yoga so much, or diaphragmatic breathing, or the kinds of things that Steve is teaching me. So my parents couldn't teach me, but Steve teaches me a great deal about how to stay centered.
That's amazing.
It's my honor to take care of her. I really do consider it one of my jobs is to be a knight for my princess.
Oh my God, this is amazing. Black love, yes.
My black knight.
Yeah.
No, but I also think, the other thing that's amazing about what you just said, though, Steven, is you sounded very sincere. You didn't sound like you were posturing, which is why I think that's so amazing. And contrary to popular belief, real love isn't rare. We're just not looking for it. It's just some of the other things get drowned out.
Who could be married to this woman and not adore her? I mean, seriously, I know what I've got.
Oh wow, come on. just heard him. So
I hope my boyfriend's listening, because this is amazing. But
22 years this Saturday. We married.
Right.
Oh wow! Happy anniversary!
Right.
Happy early anniversary. One thing I wanted to actually talk about in Horror Noire, which is an amazing documentary about the history, over 100-year history of Black expression in the horror genre. Tananarive, you said something very interesting, that so much of real life, and I'm sorry if I'm not saying it exactly the way you said it, but so much of real Black life is horror. I think that's how you phrased
Black
it.
history is Black horror, is what I said
Right.
in the documentary. And that's something that I was saying in my classroom too. And I don't mean the achievement part of Black history. I mean the stuff that the nation has really tried not to look at, has tried to pave over, and let's pretend that didn't happen, in terms of the modern day lynchings we see now, the historical lynchings that we see in photographs, just the struggle, the constant struggle financially, emotionally, geographically. They don't want you in the building, they don't want you in the neighborhood. It's like you can't get the job. There's so much struggle and loss and trauma in our experience on these shores. So, on one level, it shouldn't be surprising that so many Black folks love horror. And my mother was one of those people. My late mother, she passed on her love to me. I think because of the trauma she had suffered in the civil rights era, it was relaxing for her to watch The Exorcist because that's not as scary as a police officer throwing tear gas in your face. And that when she was 20 years old, and then subsequently had to wear dark glasses basically the rest of her life, most of the time, even indoors, because of sensitivity to light. So that's real horror. Real horror is being afraid for your kids to have sons, being afraid to have grandsons, which she very specifically was afraid of because of police violence. It's not that it's limited to the boys, but the image of what frightens America most is a big Black man. That is the boogeyman and the monster in it, that, don't get me started. So in Horror Noire, it was this great opportunity, since Jordan Peele busted this conversation wide open with Get Out in 2017, I think it was. Then, yeah, let's look at the Black horror that has come before Get Out, like Rusty Cundiff's Tales from the Hood in the 1990s, which was also racism as the monster, more vengeance in the themes in Rusty Cundiff's film. But we've had so many different kinds of Black horror films. And I have to shout out Dr. Robin R. Means Coleman, who wrote the book Horror Noire, that the documentary was adapted from. So once you watch it on Shudder and you fall in love with it, which I hope you will, definitely buy that book, because we couldn't get it all in. It's a very, very rich history. But thank goodness Jordan Peele showed up, because he's really brought it out into the open.
Well, also, and speaking of Jordan Peele, you, in your class, which sounds amazing. I have to figure out a way to, when they turn the planet back on, I want to come out to LA and sit in on this class. You not only teach this class about Get Out, but then Jordan Peele came to your class one day. How did that all come about?
Girl, Twitter. I love Twitter so much, because I spend so much time there. I want to feel like I'm not wasting my time. But once I got permission from my department chair at UCLA to do this Black horror class called The Sunken Place, I just started tweeting about it. And Evan Narciss, a reporter for IO9, wrote a story about it.
I love Evan. Evan's amazing.
And the day that story came out, I got followed by Monkey Paw on Twitter. I followed back. I said, oh, wouldn't it be great if Jordan Peele came to my class? Honey, 3 weeks later, Jordan Peele was standing at my class, because he immediately thought, oh, ha, 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 I could surprise them. This sort of mischievous side of him, where he sneaks into the back of a classroom, and that's what we set up. He showed up in a baseball helmet and a hoodie, right, honey? Steve was there to help me run security.
Basically, what we did was we snuck him in. In other words, we had the lights down in her class while she showed a clip.
Where Rose is dangling the car keys.
Rose is dangling the car keys. So we snuck him into an empty seat in about the middle of the classroom. The guy that was sitting next to that seat kind of looked at him with a little bit of suspiciousness, but nothing going on. Then when the lights came back up, Tananarive said, well, what do you think the filmmaker was trying to tell us about the commoditization of Black bodies? And a couple of hands went up. Jordan, who wearing under his baseball cap and his hoodie, raises his hand, and she said, yes, that gentleman in the back. He stood up. The class went berserk. I mean, utterly berserk. People were running out of the room crying. And what followed after that was
they were just so overwhelmed.
Yes. He had a brilliant conversation with the class. He was so giving and so open. The man is genuinely brilliant, genuinely humble, just very, very real. I just love this guy. And the kids were thrilled. It was wonderful.
One of those students I want to point out, who was actually in one of the photos we took, was named Camille Oshundara, one of my top students, absolutely brilliant. She got an internship with Monkey Paw Productions, Jordan Peele's company, as a result of that class visit. I submitted her name. Child, within months, she was a cultural executive at Monkey Paw. So she is now a part of that company, making decisions
That's
on set.
amazing.
So exciting. Yes.
I actually had a conversation with my previous guest, Matthew Cherry, because he worked at Monkey Paw for a little bit. And I told him, I thanked him because I was on the red carpet for Us. And I remember when I got on that red carpet, looking around and seeing all the brown folks, and I said, y'all did that. Because it's very rare on a red carpet to not just see brown folks, but for people to talk to us. And it was amazing. They must have, and I said, it's like you send out an edict. And he said, I can't really confirm or deny, but we definitely made sure that there was representation on that red carpet. Also, I bumped into the two of you after the Us screening. It was a while ago, and I didn't know that you'd already seen it. Apparently, you had a private screening or something?
I mean, we may have had Jordan Peele invite us to a private screening, and I mean private, just the two of us, basically. And the guy who was running the projector and would make notes whenever we laughed or whatever. But yeah, it was great. We brought our own popcorn, and we sat on a sofa and watched it on an oversized screen, and it was just such a thrill. But, you know, I was worried. I was a little worried. I loved it. Steve loved it. But we were like, holy cow, this is so different from Get Out. And it's twisty and turny. And it really sort of asks the audience to ask questions. And I was just super thrilled that audiences responded to it the way they did.
Yeah, I also felt that it was Get Out more or less takes place in our world, whereas Us is a parable. It's a fairy tale.
Yes.
You're not. Yeah. It has dream logic. It does not play by real world logic exactly. So the question I had was, are people going to be willing to chew this? Are they going to be willing to talk about it afterwards? Are they going to be willing to think? Because it felt more like there was some Italian horror and some Korean horror that has that sort of nightmare imagery logic to it. And it felt to me as if Jordan was tapping into that more than into the American tradition. It felt, you know, it felt different. You know, what we're seeing is a mind that is trying very hard to find ways to encapsulate and convey thoughts that haven't quite been expressed in American entertainment. You know, so he's quite remarkable.
I completely agree. And it's funny because that you said American, I talked to you a little bit before the show about how my mother's not from this country. She's from Bermuda. And I grew up watching very international things. Subtitles didn't bother me. I actually thought that's how you watch TV. I didn't know the words were not supposed to be on the screen. And so it's funny. Everybody that I talked to that saw the movie that was an immigrant immediately was like, oh yeah, it was about capitalism in America. But African Americans, and not just African Americans, but Americans, didn't all take that. They're like, oh, it was this, it was that. It was really more about the American family and how we're not looking at the Black American family the same way that we look at mainstream families. And I'm not saying that all those elements weren't in there, but I just thought it was really interesting how all of my like first gen friends were like, yeah, capitalism. That's exactly what that was. And how everybody else, and Stephen, you had a very interesting take on Us. You just talked about the dream world. You thought the whole thing was a dream, right?
No, I said that it used dream logic. By dream logic, what I mean by that is in dreams, your unconscious mind is throwing up symbols, you know, bits of information, snatches of words or images, and they have an emotional resonance that is not necessarily linear. It's not necessarily starting at the beginning and going to the end. You have to, in order to interpret a dream, you have to be willing to ask, well, what does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? And people who are cinephiles will do that. They'll go to the coffee shop afterwards and they'll have, you know, long conversations about things. I think that Us was chewy in that way. It was designed to trigger conversation. They weren't going to give you easy answers. What he wanted to do was evoke an emotional response. That's, in a lot of ways, that's what art tries to do, is to create images, each of which triggers an emotional response. But in series, you're going from this emotion to this emotion, this emotion, and you're having an experience while you do that. So there was enough logic to the storyline to engage you. But if you start asking questions about, well, where did they get their food? Who was feeding the rabbits? And how was it? Why was it clean down there? Where did their clothes come from? You're missing the point. You're missing the point entirely. So my feeling was that it was an extremely sophisticated piece of work. It was a much larger canvas than Get Out, which was a much more confined film, and in some ways was more impeccable because it wasn't as experimental. So you actually probably had more intelligence and talent on display in Us because he was growing, but because the canvas was larger, it wasn't necessarily as flawless as Us. What we're seeing here is an artist who has the potential to be one of the greats. He really does. If he can pull off one more on that level, I will surrender. Right now, I think he's brilliant, but I could go to think genius is right around the corner. He's very close in my estimation. He could be the guy.
Listen, he was there for me with Get Out already. I just love that movie so much. And actually, Jordan Peele also asked me to write the introduction to his annotated screenplay to Get Out, which was a huge honor because I've been teaching it. And the perspective on how he was sort of dealing with white supremacy. But Get Out is very different. Racism is the monster, and it's more of a twist. And then you get that it's about white supremacy. It has some slavery in it. It's kind of hard to miss what it's about. And Steve is right. Us is a much more experimental film. And to speak to like the differences and reactions that you got from various people who saw Us, for Black audiences, when I heard the synopsis of Us, just a Black family on vacation is menaced, I was there because I had never seen
that's the movie. That's the
horror movie about a Black family on vacation. I mean, that is simple. If he had just had them in a winter cabin and there was some kind of unseen creature in the woods, he still would have been making history with Us. Yeah. But then, no, he's just starting there. He's just starting with giving Lupita her first starring role. What? Okay, yeah, that was a thing. He's just starting with creating a Black family in a horror movie. But then, like Steve said, he's expanded it to this dream space and dream logic and asking all these questions. And I think for a lot of Black Americans, they do think of race first, their isolation. They were the only Black people there. Whereas if you're not so accustomed to thinking about race first, it's a little easier to see the anti-capitalist message in the movie.
And that's what I think the immigrant thing part came from. I'm sorry, Stephen, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. Get Out was clearly about race. It was about, who are our allies? Can we trust anyone? And if you're white and you're watching, and I think the question is, has there been so much damage that we can't reach out and connect? It's a very real question. I'd never seen anybody ask that. But Us, race is secondary to class in my book. I think that although it impacts, because I think anyone who's upper middle class Black, and clearly that family was doing just fine in terms of their finances, starts wondering, are you leaving your neighborhood behind? Are you leaving your people behind? And that fear that your comfort, your luxury could conceivably be considered to be based on the misery of others. I think that you have to process, what do you think about the fact that there is misery in the world? How can you enjoy your wealth and comfort, knowing that there are people who are dying and suffering and starving and hate you for what you have? I think that in both cases, he's dealing with real issues that he has as he has been experiencing his life. And that is what an artist does. They take their actual emotions and use them to power their work.
So I'd like to jump forward a little bit to Twilight Zone. Now, Twilight Zone, I know you're happy. Twilight Zone, you both got to collaborate on an episode, season 2, episode 8. So sorry for the confusion on social. It was episode 8, not episode 2, called Small Town. It was starring Damon Wayans Jr. And Damon Wayans Jr. plays a quiet church handyman who uncovers a magical scale model, imbuing him with the power to help his struggling small town. But the mayor takes all the credit. So I gotta ask, is this part of that dreamlike metaphor that you were just talking about, or were you coming forward with another theme here?
No, I think that given the basic premise of magic, in other words, you're in the Twilight Zone, so magic exists. We didn't have to justify why that thing was there. If you're going to watch a show called The Twilight Zone, you're prepared for that. So, given the existence of such a thing, the rest of it makes sense, I think. So in any fantasy piece, you have what if there was a magical model, okay, and you don't have to ask, well, how are they getting their food? Where are they getting their clothes? Stuff like that. So it's not dream. It's a fantasy story, but given that the internal structure of it is fairly logical.
I think we saw some opportunities to try to shade it a little bit with political overtones, but not too much. We didn't want to be heavy-handed with it. One thing, for example, even though it's set in a small town, one reviewer mentioned in an article about the director, Alonso Alvarez Pareda, that this is the kind of small town in TV and cinema that we're not used to seeing be a multiracial town, like where there would be a Black lead and a Latina across the street with her son. And frankly, that was very important to us at the script stage. And one of the most exciting aspects was to see how loyal they were, not just because, sometimes you write a character Black, Steve's been through this, and then they cast him white anyway, because it's just easier, and the race is not that important to the person who's doing the casting. But I thought race was very important because I did not want it to look like it was this all-white town ganging up on Damon Wayans Jr. or ganging up on one of this Latino boy. And as it turned out, it's more of almost a utopian image of what we can all be like if we work together and we put our divisions aside. So I kind of like the way the episode came out.
And Steven, I've got to ask, you have a very special connection to Twilight Zone. This is not the first Twilight Zone episode that you have written. And I know I have some Twilight Zone fans in the chat. So please tell us, tell us the connection.
There's more connection than I actually said to you, because Twilight Zone was my favorite show when I was growing up. I grew up during the, I'm basically, I've been around for a while. And I watched the original Rod Serling run in when it was first broadcast back in the early '60s. And then the first television I ever wrote was for the Phil DeGuerre revival of the Twilight Zone in the 1980s. So the opportunity to work on Jordan Peele's iteration of it was kind of a dream come true. I mean, I just absolutely loved it. So there was a lot of emotion for me and a lot of meaning for me because it connects back with my childhood and with the beginning of my career.
I have to admit that I did not watch The Twilight Zone as a kid and really have only seen a handful, don't hate me everybody, of episodes compared to probably some of you who are super, super fans. But the importance of this is not lost on me. So my excitement is, it's Twilight Zone, but mostly it's like, it's Jordan Peele, though, because I'm such a fan of what he's doing in the industry and the opportunities he's creating. So that was I was like, it's Twilight Zone, and I get to do Twilight Zone based on Jordan Peele's approach to storytelling and what he's trying to do. So that is super exciting. And it was a direct result of that classroom visit, because we came in, they invited us in to pitch. I mean, we're no fools. So we came in and we pitched, and we were probably in there 2 or 3 times before we finally settled on which story and how to go forward. But it was a really, really positive experience. And just like Steve had his first TV credit for Twilight Zone, my first TV co-credit is Twilight Zone. So there's that symmetry.
And actually, Tananarive, to that end, what was it like going from prose writing to a writer's room? Because you're when you're prose writing, you're kind of writing in solitude, right?
Oh, for the most part. Most of my novels are solo. I've done some collaborations with Steve. I did a collaboration with my late mother. But for the most part, you're absolutely right. It's a solitary undertaking. And while I haven't yet really been in a television writer's room because we were freelancing, I've learned the collaborative nature of screenwriting, mostly because I collaborate with Steve on scripts. And so all those lessons he had learned previously, I was learning for the first time, which is that you sort of have to agree on the vision, and then you have to agree on the methodology. So we do the 1 page, the 3 page, the 15 page, and then we go to script, and all that is like he said, he has a regimented life, and that's his approach to doing it. So when we're collaborating, that's what we do, because you can't have one writer tearing off ahead. You have to agree on a vision when you're collaborating. So I just said in a meeting this morning that I have a mini writer's room at home, right? And that's what we do. And it's very, very different. That's probably the most different aspect of television writing, screenwriting versus prose. And the other piece of advice I would give people who want to make that transition, because I just decided to make the transition because I wanted to be helpful and bringing some of my adaptations to screen that were stalling out. To this point, I had never had an adaptation on screen, and I would see them stalling out at the script stage. And it's like, well, maybe if I learn how to write scripts, I think naively, that'll help. And it does help, but at the same time, there are a lot of executives and studios who are not that eager for the author to be involved in the adaptation process. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag, but I would say to any writer out there, take a screenwriting class. If you can't find a screenwriting class, then find scripts online and read them while you watch your favorite movies, and start with short scripts and notice the difference between prose, where you can go internal and hear their thoughts, and screenwriting, which is all visual symbols and dialogue. And action.
As far as the writer not being involved with the adaptation, I don't think Joe Hill ever got that memo, like ever.
Well, he's doing great. That's one of my favorite shows right now is Nosferatu on AMC.
Nosferatu. I just had Jakara Smith on the show a couple weeks ago, Maggie. So I'm curious about the show itself. He's able to control things in this town with this magical scale model. And the changes he makes seem very emotionally based. He's suffered a loss. Is this story really not about the town, but about his loss? I definitely wanted to explore that.
Stories are all about two things: what is true and who am I? What are human beings? What is the world around them? So you have to start with what's going on inside him. So his backstory, having suffered that loss, gives him a gap. There's something wrong. There's something missing. He feels some guilt. He feels pain and loss. So ultimately, what the story will be about is, what does he need in order to become a healthy human being who can move on with his life? And I think that his need to try to control, because he was not unable to control his wife's death. So if he can control what's going on in the town just a little bit, then he's keeping her alive. She was mayor. And he's also taking steps to try to make the universe a more orderly place. The fact that it turns into a battle of wills almost between him and the mayor has to do with the fact that we cannot control, no matter what we do. There are always going to be factors. By letting it be the mayor, you're simply personifying that into an individual rather than just random facts going wrong, which then gives us a personified opposition that's very easy to see. It's drama that is easy to understand. It automatic once you create that opposition, it automatically suggests scenes, dialogue, action, and so forth and so on. And it has its own arc. But yes, it's primarily about this man who is totally alone at the beginning, and the last shot, he's walking with what could conceivably end up being,
Anyway, spoiler.
No. We can spoil it. It's been out for a couple weeks. We have a thing that you can spoil it. It's been out for a couple weeks, and there was a homework assignment to watch it. So no, I don't play that. If it had just dropped, and if you don't want to spoil it, it's fine. But if it had just dropped, I would absolutely say don't spoil it. But I think a lot of people in the chat here have seen it already.
Well, one thing I just wanted to say about that butting of heads between the mayor and our character Jason. By the way, Jason is named after our son Jason. And one of the first things he said as he was watching it when he saw the model was, "You should drop a rock on that." And then the guy did drop a rock on it, so he was well named. But in any case, we wanted to have Jason as the character, yes, who's trying to rebuild, who's trying to come back from grief. But the mayor is basically someone who has been coddled and privileged and is incompetent to the position he finds himself in. So there were questions swirling around, is that Trump? I mean, that really, as political as I am, that isn't what was in my head at the time, especially because some people felt that Twilight Zone, the first season, had been a little heavy-handed at times with its messaging. So we were trying to be careful not to make anyone overtly Trump-like or anything like that. But of course, it's hard, and especially in today's political climate with the election coming up, not to ask those questions about, what is leadership? What is the difference between a leader who actually performs and one who only claims to perform? So I can understand why people would see some similarities.
Emilio, the boy that basically was the artist, what does he represent? I felt he represented the truth, but I wanted to hear it from the creators.
I would say absolutely. He is the truth teller. Art is our way of trying to tell the truth. Even when it's fiction, we're trying to say things that are true, even if they're not real. It's something I tell my students. So Emilio is a kid who calls it like he sees it. He draws the mayor in caricature. He sees the giant spider. Instead of being weirded out, he's just full of wonder for it and puts it up as a mural. So yes, I think Emilio does represent the truth, and also, speaking for myself, that part of myself that is the artist. That's I like the child characters. Yeah.
I would think that if one of the core human experiences is the creation of family, is falling in love and so forth and so on, that maturation process thing, then our lead character's lost relationship killed the concept, the capacity for him to have a family. Along that way, they can't go down that particular road. In that way, Emilio might represent his own lost childhood, his own lost innocence, his ability to see and accept the miraculous with a sense of wonder rather than cynicism. If I were to think about that, I mean, to be honest, I don't think about I wasn't thinking about the symbol of who Emilio was. I was too busy thinking about who Emilio was as a human being and what he would want and how he would react, and trying to create those relationships so that everybody was connected in some meaningful and emotionally resonant way. I didn't have the chance to kind of step back, put it aside for a month and look back and say, well, what are these symbols operating here? Television happens on too rapid a pace for some of the steps that you can take if you're working in a more leisurely fashion with a piece of art.
I'm also
curious to hear other people analyze
it. I'm actually curious about something, because the ending. Now, it's so funny because so many shows, and Twilight Zone is not one of those shows, but a lot of shows basically wrap up everything neatly in a bow at the end, or you get all your answers. But at the end, the town is kind of, I don't want to say it's jacked up, but it's a little different. But it's not even as a spoiler, just the imagery of the end of the show. When I look at some of the things that we're seeing on our screens now about what's actually, happening in different areas. TV shows obviously are written way in advance of their airing. But what's it like looking back on this show and thinking about where your heads were at when you started writing it, when you went in for that second or third pitch, and as opposed to now where the world is and it's just aired?
If I can say in all honesty, while there are a lot of things that surprise me about what's going on today, the denial of the virus, not wanting to wear masks, things that never would have even occurred to me, there are ways in which I'm not terribly surprised that things are going south, right? So this was in 2019. I think we started talking about the script in summer 2019, turned it in fall 2019. A lot of this writing was on the wall, even if we hadn't seen the virus and the mass demonstrations. And believe me, if we had had our druthers, there would have been more destruction of that town, because we had to peel it back for budget reasons. But just so y'all know, there was going to be a big fire, not like burning the whole town down, but one building in particular was going to be on fire, and it was just too expensive. I don't think anyone would care if I say that. So
it's true. Yeah. No, that's the reality of creativity. In your head, you can imagine anything, but once it comes time to turn it into an actual image, can be colossally expensive and logistically very, very difficult. So you have to be willing to roll with that. You have to be willing to listen to what they can and cannot do in terms of production. I mean, heck, I've had producers warn me that their actors, you know, could not be given difficult dialogue because they weren't really good actors. I mean, it's like, well, that's
like, why
an
are you hiring
interesting
them?
thing to do. Well, in this particular case, because they were gorgeous.
Ah,
Well, it's often the case,
yes.
isn't that true?
Yep.
But in
Exactly.
any case,
Baywatch.
but one thing I will add that has been a profound lesson for me as a writer, and I did get to go on set for just a day, like right before everything shut down. It was one of the last things, my last trip was on set to see them shooting the interiors with Damon Wayans Jr. and the model, and how understated his performance seemed from a distance. But in the camera, it's a completely different expression of the character. It's like, oh, so acting for the camera and acting for the stage, not the same at all. That's a lesson I learned. And the phrase I took away with me is a whisper is a shout on the screen, right? So we didn't need the big fire at the end. All we needed was a couple overturned cars, and you could see the mess. It was like they've got a big mess to clean up. That was the point of the fire, was they were going to have a big mess to clean up, and it still looked like a big mess to clean up without the extra expense. So that's something to bear in mind, that symbols do carry a lot of power. Visual symbols carry a lot of power on the screen.
Now, there's a lot of questions in the chat that we're going to get to in a second. I just wanted to ask a couple last things before we get there. All this renewed interest in Black horror and in Black storytellers. I mean, if it wasn't for the pandemic, we'd have, I think, Antebellum with Janelle Monáe would be out. Chris Rock's Saw would be out. We got Candyman coming. Has there, and I put your show and Jordan Peele's Twilight Zone in this same scenario. Are we seeing a actual renaissance again of Black stories in horror in particular? Or is Hollywood literally just trying to get another Get Out? Is the machine doing what the machine does?
The machine is doing what the machine does, and there is a renaissance.
There's
a definite wave. As more and more people of color are behind the camera, they influence the decisions that are being made. And as long as the audiences support it, that machine, that thing called Hollywood, says, oh, there's money. Corporations are just big machines that eat money. I mean, they don't have politics. The people inside them do. But what the machine wants to know is, can I make money if I do this? So if there are people in the machine who want to create images that appeal to their hearts, and the audience rewards those images with money, now you have a situation where you have a potential positive feedback. You have enough filmmakers who have a chance to do something that a couple of geniuses can rise. I mean, 99% of anything is going to be crap. So we have to have enough room to fail. So we have to have some movies and TV shows and books that make a ton of money, so that a whole bunch of other people can make small projects, have a chance to develop their chops, and for the geniuses among them to rise.
Yeah, a lot of people wonder, will this last? Can this last? When you say again, you're probably thinking about the 1990s, which gave birth to some of the other great Black horror that we had. Tales from the Hood, Death by Temptation, Candyman, all these kinds of projects came out in the 90s, although Candyman isn't quite Black horror. That's a different conversation. But the question of whether it can sustain is an interesting one. Almost anyone who's in the industry, a lot of you who are not in the industry know that there's a lot more attention on Black folks in particular right now. So your phone is blowing up, your texts are blowing up, your email, if you're lucky. People wanting to have meetings, meet and greets, what you got, what can I get? There's a bit of a feeding frenzy right now, looking for Black projects. That definitely will not last at this level. In fact, it's probably already tapering off. Okay, so that's why the prepared were the winners in this case. If you had a script that was already ready to go that you could send to someone, if like if you have, say, a podcast, it's already amazing, you can get in through the door. And it will be up to the creative community to continue to learn, to grow, to keep our projects. Like, for instance, if you want to write a film, make it under $1 million, make it under $2 million, so that you can earn that money back and succeed upwards, and not be a financial disappointment, so that the next person who comes behind you can't get that deal. And 1 or 2 is not very much money, but 10 million and under, I would say, is a good place to aim. 5 million and under, Blumhouse is 5 million. So if they can do $5 million projects, what's your $5 million project? Know what the industry trends are, know what a realistic budget is, study, study, study. Because when you get that opportunity, you want that script to be the best it can be, which means that you have labored over it, draft after draft after draft. You have had beta readers tell you what's wrong with it and then fix what's wrong with it. You have to be prepared. It really will be up to us to sustain, because those doors are not going to stay wide open, but enough of us can push them open. Or like Ava DuVernay said once when I invited her to Spelman, we can build our own doors.
There you go. I mean, that's it in a nutshell. I mean, when people ask me, what can you bring to the table? I usually say, I bought the table. What do you want? Like, I got a tape. That table's not the problem. The problem is your perception. Now, listen, one thing I want to thank you both for is you're not just talking about what you do. You regularly teach people how to do what you do, how to write horror, how to write screenplays, how to work inside the system. So I want to keep this class kind of going in the chat, take a few questions and discuss this. Thank you so much for being generous with your time and sticking around. And then at the very end, I want you to share how some of the classes that you have online that people can take.
Sure.
Love to.
One of the questions that's in the chat is, how long did it take to get the story right? This is in terms of Twilight Zone, in terms of the fitting backstory, like the supernatural to the arc of the story. How long did it take to basically whittle that down?
From the first pitch, from that first 1.5 page pitch we sent,
yes,
to the final draft, about what, 3 months, honey?
It's possible. From I think that once we got
sustained work, some of that is waiting. I'm
right,
sorry.
right, just beating out the story, which is a critical importance. That was to the final script. That's 3 months might be about right, but in general, I would think that saying it takes about a month to beat out a story would be about right, kind of roughly.
And what made you want to make it a small town, and how did you basically make that small town its own character?
Well, T, you want to say? You
see that big grin on my face? The only reason I'm grinning is that one of the projects Steve and I have worked on is several attempts to do adaptations of my novel, The Good House. And even though I don't think I realized it consciously at the time, that small town setting that I have in my novel has been something that I have so badly wanted to put on the screen, that there was a little bit of wish fulfillment in being able to set this story in a small town. I get the same visuals I would have had in a story about The Good House. It's just a completely different story. That for me, we lived in a small town for years. So from a distance, I have quite a fondness for them.
The initial idea was dealt with a street, actual like a cul-de-sac. But as we developed it, it seemed to me that an isolated town would work for us better, a self-contained unit. How large it should be, what should be a piece of it, whatever. One of the things that's very true is that I look for symbolic resonance in the things that I'm doing when I'm not really working with the nuts and bolts of characters. And the title of Small Town is a three-way punt. It takes place in a small town. The model is literally a small town, and it is a town that is small-minded in certain ways. So right. I like that. It has what I call vertical integration in terms of the way the symbols are working together. And when you're working in a visual medium, in television and film, you need to be able to turn the sound off and still follow the story. So the way the visual images interact is of critical importance. So it was very appealing in that sense. It felt neat, if you know what I mean.
And let's just keep it real. For a lot of us, if we end up driving off the road in one of these small towns, we're just scared. It's not a place that on the surface will often look welcoming, because often there isn't any diversity in a town that looks like that. And that was another place where the producers were really faithful to the script. I think it was your line, Steve, where you said it would, in order to be a one-horse town, first it would need a horse. And I heard right, it would need to borrow a horse. We tried to write clever wording in the script too, so it would be entertaining, even if it, that isn't actually going to be on the screen.
Remember that your first audience is the person reading the script, that you have to entertain them. So we'll actually put little jokes in the script to make them laugh, or phrase something in a way that would scare them. And then when you do subsequent drafts, you deliberately change things up just a little bit to keep them entertained, so that they don't, lull into a trance. Oh, I've read this. Oh, here's what I asked them to change. But you're keeping them alert, because there's going to be a little nugget for them. There's going to be something, it's a human being who's sitting there, not a faceless, group. It's a human being with hopes and dreams and needs. And if they feel it, if they're feeling something as they read it, you have a much better chance of getting past them.
And just as an aside on the town itself, it's a little teeny town in British Columbia in Canada. And I first knew they were shooting the episode because I had a Google alert for Twilight Zone or whatever. And there were stories coming out of this town where the shoot was. They brought like more than 200 people in the crew, I think. So the shoot itself had that impact on the economy that the neon sign did in the episode. Like, they really were bustling at the coffee shop. They really were bustling at the gas station. They weren't laying people off like they usually did at that time of year. I was dying to actually go to the town, but they thought it was too logistically difficult, and I ended up seeing the interiors instead. But I would have been in hog heaven to be walking those streets during the shoot.
Yeah. I also heard a story about they moved certain things, set things around, like that they stayed true to the book to the point where I think when he's looking out the window and he's supposed to see what the diner across the street, they move the exterior of the diner. Is that right? Did I get that?
That was one of the things in the articles I was like, oh my gosh, there's the red sports car. There's the church. I mean, everything that we had written was coming to life before our eyes. But because the church in the real town was not across the street from the diner, which they did paint orange, by the way, and which the town loves so much, they're going to leave it orange.
Oh my God.
They built a replica of the church. So when you see Jason walking into the church across the street from the diner, that is not the actual church. It's just an exterior replica. And they spent that money to build a replica for the church, just so it'll be across the street.
That's amazing. Another question was, okay, what was it like collaborating on the story? More specifically, how did you divide the work or navigate creating your own system? So they're asking sort of more of the nitty-gritty of how did you figure out who was going to write what, or are you so synergistic with the work that you've done before that you just know, oh, dialogue, me, exteriors, you, that kind of thing?
No.
Yeah,
No. Basically, we work out the story together, and then one or the other of us takes lead to create the first draft. You can always tell which of us does the first draft because that person's name comes first on the book or on the script. It's as simple as that. And then we rewrite together.
Right. So
the Tennyson Hardwick novels, Tananarive's name goes first because we decided that she should write the first draft. On the Devil's Wake novels or on this Twilight Zone script, my name comes first because I went first in terms of actually creating the first draft.
But the real and that's the most difficult part of collaborating for me is breaking the story, which is like when you both agree, okay, these are the things that are going to happen in the story, these are the characters, these are the character arcs, at least as much as you can see up to that point, because once you get to the end, you're going to have to go back and make sure you know what all those character arcs are and that you filled up all the holes. That's the hard part for me, is hammering it out to the treatment stage. 1.5 pages, 3 pages, 15 pages. We both agree on every word of that. And that's tough. I've written with my mother. I've written with my husband. I feel like I can do anything because I've collaborated with family members. But what I get out of it in both cases and the ongoing relationship with Steve is two minds, you know? So sure, I can write scripts. I've written short scripts, and I do little, and I still write prose by myself, but I actually prefer to collaborate for television and film because there are so many aspects to think about that it helps to have two minds. It's just faster. We can write much faster as two people than I think most people could as one. Would you agree, honey?
I think that there's a good chance that that's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
If
Just helps
as
us be
long
fast.
as one or the other of us feels enthusiastic about it,
Yeah.
then you can kind of take the bit in your teeth and run. Like we just got finished doing the first draft on a horror script, and I got it started and we worked out the basic plot elements together. And then I began expanding it out in treatment form, which means, continuing to flesh out scenes, a little bit of sample dialogue, just kind of playing with it. But then Tananarive got antsy and decided to just jump in with both feet. And so for weeks, she was just chewing away at it. And so it was like, all I'm going to do is stand back and say, okay.
Well,
go
you had
for it.
you had already gone from beginning to end and laid out, the scenes and expanded some of the scenes. But anyway, yeah, I had just finished my novel and that energy needed somewhere to go. So I was just glad the script was there.
And when you're collaborating together, this is actually a question I have. Do you have like a writing room? Is there a room that's got little index cards everywhere? Or are you both all digital and everything's in the computer and you're just sharing files back and forth?
It's so funny you say that. It's like she's seen your office, honey. How does she know?
Yeah,
She's got Post-it, posters,
I've got
boards.
Post-its, posters. I've got a double-sided whiteboard. I've got a cork board. I've got big, huge Post-it pads that I can scrawl on. The fact is that every time I will use Post-it notes, I will use index cards, I'll use all sorts of different things, because every time you express a story in a different way, different things are revealed. So you can take the exact same information and put it all on index cards, and you put it up on the wall. Then, okay, you take what you got up on the wall and you type it into a Google Doc. In the process of doing that, new things will be revealed. Then if I share that Google Doc with Tananarive, then she goes in there and she adds things that I don't see. So the way I write, I take the position that the events actually occurred. They really did happen. And I'm like a reporter who is investigating, researching, poking and prodding, trying to find out what is true, what was said, what was done, why did it happen, what happened after that. And I just keep prodding at it. I keep turning it around in my mind or on paper. I also will print out a script rather than just working on it on the computer, because scripts look different on paper, and books look different on paper than they do on a computer. And so every time I change from one way of looking at it to another way of looking at it, different things are revealed. And what I always look for is what I call the low-hanging fruit. Every day I will look for the easy fixes. I never tackle the hard stuff first. It's just I will do the easy stuff. What I know is that in the back of my mind, there's a problem-solving machine. And in the process of doing the easy stuff, I'm getting more and more familiar with the project, so that my dream time will actually start coming up with some of the answers. And I will wake up in the morning with answers to questions that I posed myself the previous night. So it's getting more and more familiar with your creative process. Your creative process is like a cat. It's not a dog. It doesn't just come when you call and do tricks.
I can't, Steven, you are validating my life right now. I can't, because first of all, I now know how to meditate and how to breathe. So that's first. So I'm not gonna be stressed out anymore. Second,
great.
I know my boyfriend is watching this. Honey, this is why I have notes everywhere. It's not about the note. It's about the fact that I'm getting it out of my head. That's why I have 9 million notebooks. And then I sit down, and my new thing is actually reading my notes into Google. So the act of saying it is, because Google has dictation, the act of saying it gets my thoughts out. And then that's another round. And so you are validating everything I'm doing.
Look, here's the critical thing. You have to find your way of doing it. You want to talk to lots of different writers, people who are successful. Ignore what the wannabes say, because there are 1,000 ways to get lost when you're trying to get to Disneyland, and only one direct way to get there. So the patterns, the beliefs, the behaviors that will optimize your life in any particular arena are always going to be known by the people who are there. So if you talk to them, so I've said a bunch of stuff to you. If I give you 100 ideas and one of them sparks your own idea, you don't have to take anything that I'm saying, but you'll say, oh, I could do that this way. I could do that this way. Everyone has to find their own way up the mountain, and every time the mountain changes a little bit.
I just want to add to that.
Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry, Tananarive.
Add to that. Let me say as a preface that anybody who's out there feeling down on themselves, mad at themselves because they're not creative right now because of everything that's happening in the world, that is fine. Maybe this is your time to be gardening. Maybe this is your time to really, really bond with your children, your cat, to binge watch. Do not feel bad. But if you want to be creating and you're still feeling stuck because of emotions or because you're between projects and you don't know how to get back into one of the methods we teach under what we call our life writing program is a sentence a day. So I'm not saying everyone out there has to write a sentence a day, but if you want to write and if you're stalling, start with that philosophy. Just as long as you've done your one sentence, you have fulfilled your obligation to yourself. But the trick is, after a couple days or maybe even the first day, you'll find that you can't stop after the first sentence. You have to keep going. That's how I got through my novel outline. I just spent 7 years on a novel. I got through the outline, a sentence a day. I got through the project when I didn't feel like working, a sentence a day. This screenplay that Steve was talking about, I wasn't that excited day one. I was like, oh, this is typing. I wanted to be in my novel. I didn't want to be working in this new thing. So a sentence a day. That's all you. And then eventually the fire lights, the inner child is like, oh, this is fun. And you're off to the races. That's how it is for me. I know some writers never feel that love and joy and like, oh my gosh, 2 hours went by. But I do get to that point, but it's not always like that by any means.
But you can increase the percentage of times that you go into flow state. What you want to do is to go into flow state, and you can refine that capacity by addressing it directly. Tai Chi, yoga, distance running, in any kind of dancing.
So
anything that gets you into flow state.
Is flow state like the writer's avatar state? Is this like?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a state where time begins to disappear, where you're not aware of stuff happening outside. You're there in the thing, and it's happening. To be quite honest, I think we're all adults here. Everybody experiences flow state at least 3 different times I can think of. One is just before you go to sleep. You enter into what's called the hypnagogic state. The second one is when you're first waking up in the morning, same thing. And the third one is when you're making love. Quite frankly, that sense of 2 bodies dissolving and becoming one, that's what they call the dissolution of the I thou relationship. It's no longer 2 separate people. It's like one person. This thing is happening. That's what you want with your painting, your dancing, your writing, that your brain is moving into the space. And your ability to do that, everybody does that at times. We go into that dream state when we're watching movies and television and reading books. It works the other way too. You can learn to go into that state when you are creating movies and television and books. Creating that connection between your skills and your capacity to access your skills in a flow state, naturally, spontaneously. That's what you aim at any high level activity. So you seek out people who are masters of that and ask them how they do that, and you will learn things that you can then apply to your discipline.
I gotta thank you so much. This has been like an amazing class. Like I could talk to the 2 of you for like another 2 hours, but we don't have time to do that here. But I do want you to tell folks where they can learn from you. Please share. I personally am taking. I just did this. I just downloaded your Afrofuturism course. I just started it, and I'm super excited. But if you could talk about that course as well as the other one that you were just talking about, we'll try and put some links in the chat here.
So www.afrofuturismwebinar.com. Afrofuturismwebinar.com was basically taking my UCLA class and offering it to the public. But Steve and I co-teach it. It's 10 weeks. The literature, music, including Janelle Monáe, and film of Afrofuturism. So it's sort of an intro course. That's 10 weeks. We have an ongoing writing class called www.lifewritingpremium.com, which is a monthly subscription where you get essays and videos and lectures to not just address your writing skills, but the life of the writer. And Steve, maybe you want to talk about the www.writerwebinar.com.
Yeah, we do a free life writing. Life writing is applying Joseph Campbell's model of the hero's journey to your own life and the process of writing as well as to the plot. So it's my baby. I created it about 30 something years ago. And Life Writing Live is an online webinar that we do, about 4 times a month, really. And you can see it on our pages over on Facebook, or we're setting it up so that it can be seen on YouTube at www.writerwebinar.com. And the next episode will be on tomorrow, that'd be July 29th at 6 p.m. Pacific. And so you'll be able to see that there. And if you go to writerwebinar.com, you'll find our website, the Mastery Plus YouTube channel, in which there are just tons of videos and lots of information. We give away as much as we possibly can. We really do. And you can also join our life writing group over on Facebook. We've got hundreds of people in there who are we're all engaging with this process called How Can We Live High Energy, Healthy, Creative Lives.
Thank you both so much for joining me. This has been an amazing episode. This is one that I want to go back and watch myself so that I can make sure that I didn't miss anything. So thank you again for joining me. Please come back next week. And you got to follow on social media at theblerdgurl, theblerdgurl, on Twitter, on Instagram. Y'all know I get mail on Twitter. I will see you next week.